Hello, this is John Gulick with Storysmithing, and I've been looking forward to this episode for quite a while. I'm going to be reading the full The Unbaroned Castle story, and I hope you really enjoy it. In the next episode, I'll be going into describing how that writing process went for me and some things that stood out along the way. But for us today, I hope that you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The Unbaroned Castle, Chapter 1. It was raining again, and though the castle would gleam, Clara knew it would not be clean. A fat raindrop hung from her rafters, glimmering like a star from the nearby torches. It shivered and tumbled into the void. She felt the lightest tap on her chin before cold blossomed. She sighed, wiped herself off, and rose from bed. She couldn't expect any better from the hutch. The house's thatching had been new when the older maids were young, and neither aged well. Sullen light poked through the gaps where the walls met the ceiling. The autumn chill crept in. Claire dressed herself in a plain, colorless dress like the maids readying themselves around her. Like soldiers donning armor, she always thought. The steady patter of rain was punctuated by a cough, the rustling of cloth. The older maid beside Clara was working at a boot that was nearer an undersized sandal. Clara knelt and helped her squeeze the shoe on. She drew a breath, but Molly's eyes stopped her. The morning had no room for words, not yet. Clara sighed again and collected her basket from beside her bed. She eyed the crack in the door frame, a lightning bolt broken through the wood by a slammed door, Molly had said. Through it she saw a strip of the distant castle, gray, tall, and far. She wondered why the hutch had been built so far from the castle. Hannagrell was a small town, but that didn't make the walk short. The storm rumbled threateningly. Clara wanted to stay inside, but her duties would not wait. She shuddered to think how the Baron would react if she were late. The others were weighing the same scales, it seemed. Finally, Molly cleared her throat. On we go, then. There was a groan, the inevitable sigh of an old tree breaking beneath the weight of the sky, and the maids faced the storm. Rain saturated Clara's clothes within seconds, heavy as a basket of wash. Mud slurped at her boots with each step. She followed the other maids up the main street. Hunchback stores lined the muddy street, torchlight flickering through grimy windows. She wondered what it would be like to have a place of her own instead of the hutch, to stay inside when it rained, and maybe even to have a fire that she could share. She would have a kettle of something warm too, and her guests would thank her for it. She hardly noticed her grip break as something wrenched her basket away. She whirled in confusion and saw a boy racing into the side streets with her basket. A braying laugh erupted, and a guard in thick furs pushed himself up from a chair, tucked beneath the eaves of two shops. He shook his head appreciatively at the vanishing boy and grinned at Clara. "That's my boy, he is, fast as a snake and his mother's wits even." The guard cackled again and slumped into his chair. "That was your son?" Clara managed. "Can't you—" She tried to stop, but it was too late. The soldier rose again and closed the distance to her. The sword at his belt gleamed like a bar of moonlight. "I can do anything I want. Good thing of soldiering so far from the cities. Baron don't mind if we're a little rough down here, long as we're nice in the castle." He gave her a filthy grin. "Wife's been wishing for a new basket. Just like those maids got," she said. "Smart boy, ain't he?" She nodded, eyes on his black boots. "You're a fresh one, but you ought to know better. Next guard might not be so nice as Yenner." "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm afraid I must go now. I'm to collect the Baron's—" But Yenner was already walking away, chuckling wetly. "'Fraid I must go. Best save that talk for the castle, all proper like." She hurried along before he remembered to tell her how terrible a guard he was. It was unsettling to walk without her basket, like she was going into battle without a sword. She moved deeper into the cluster of maids. As they trudged towards the castle, the shops and homes grew straighter and cleaner. The chill had sunk into her bones, and she eyed the glow of torches and fireplaces through the castle windows. Finally, she passed Oaken's Inn, with its well-swept floors and fruity, spicy smells. Before her towered the castle. She followed the maids across the cobblestone courtyard and around the castle to a door tucked near the back. The maids hurried inside, and Clara felt her own pace increase until she burst through the door. A roaring fireplace greeted her, sizzling and spitting with the fat of the boar suspended on a spit. A table of apples, pears, and melons lay on her other side. Bottles of fresh, cold milk were stacked neatly in an icebox. 4 cooks looked up from the dough they were working and smiled tiredly. Nam was the oldest, and she nodded to the maids. Thought of you when we heard the rain starting. Tough day, rain makes. Anything left? Molly asked. Nam grimaced. Guards was hungry yesterday, but there should be some. Another cook slipped out of the room and re-emerged with a basket of bread heels and apples. Another drew a half a loin from the icebox and divided it into small slices. Plates were shuffled among the cooks, and within minutes each maid held their breakfast. The bread was tough, the meat cold. They finished the pudding, Nam said apologetically. 10 spoons of honey it had. Mandy, the youngest cook, looked up. Benters couldn't make taxes this year with their fields bad as they are. Soldiers took their stores of honey to even up. A frown had crossed Molly's face. What'll the Benters trade when the merchants come by? They spent all spring putting up those hives. At least we'll have something sweet to cook with, Nam said. Clara finished her heel of bread. You could bake up another pan of that pudding, just for us. The soldiers never come down here. Best not risk it, Nam said, and the room lulled into silence. The maids dripped themselves dry, watching the water trace paths across the stone and gurgle down the drain. The fire was wonderful. Clara wished she could stay for just a little longer, but a bell clanged somewhere far overhead. A sour taste filled Clara's mouth. She stirred into motion with the other maids. She passed her plate to Mandy, her hands suddenly cold and clammy. The cooks were returning to their chores, and the maids disappeared up the stairs, one by one, into the belly of the castle. Nam passed Clara a tray laden with fresh sausage, roasted potatoes, bread rolls, and a mug of milk beside a tankard of ale. She had no basket, so it was easier than normal to carry the tray. Still, the ascent to the Baron's quarters was long and winding. The others gradually slipped into side passages until only Clara remained, twining her way around and around the staircase. She was alone. She savored the freedom of it. Too soon she reached the scar, a long, wicked line cut into the stone by Baron Randers during a drunken rage. Warm thoughts flooded Clara's mind, and she rounded the staircase to the Baron's back door. She felt like a leaf in a stream, caught between the scar and the door. A broom and bucket sat beside the door. She ran through her pleasantries once more, and an excuse for the basket. Then she entered the Baron's room. The sitting room was dark as the grave. Torches lay cold in their brackets. The room was silent, save for the wind sighing through a hole in the wall large as a fist. Through the hole lay the main walk of the city. The nearby stone was scarred, white, and broken. Chips lay across the floor, along with the splintered haft of a spear. She couldn't stop a small sigh. A miss, then. Baron Randers must have already left. Maybe the morning was not so bad after all. Clara set the tray down on a table beside the couch and set to work. She lit the torches as the Baron would want them when he returned. The full room was revealed to her. Clogged with chairs, wine cabinets, chests, and fur rugs. The only open stretch, spanned from the center of the room to the scarred hole in the wall. A spear stand stood beside it. Clara swept up the wooden splinters and iron fragments. Sweeping up the broken spearhead was her favorite chore, and she amused herself panning across the room to find all the broken chips. The spread was especially far today, and she wondered how Scholar Davidson would go about finding the sharp fragments. He'd probably say it's best not to throw spears at the wall in the first place. A dark patch colored the furs leading to the Baron's room. Another wine stain. She would need to fetch soap and hot water to scrub it out. Still, she felt light. Not only had she avoided the Baron this morning, the warmth of the torches was driving the last of the chill from her. She set the broken spear and bucket of fragments at the stairs. She just needed to collect the old linens. The door to the Baron's room was shut, and no light escaped. She crossed the room once more, nearly whistling, and opened the door. The Baron's corpse lay sprawled on the bedroom's balcony floor. A scream tore from her throat, and before her quick, shallow breaths cut it off, she backpedaled from the room and collapsed on a couch. She was lightheaded, tingling with shock. A guard eased open the door at the mouth of the sitting room. "Everything all right, my lord?" He focused on Clara and sputtered, "Didn't realize you were busy, my lord. I'll just be outside the door." He slammed it shut. Clara heard the low burr of conversation outside the door, punctuated by a rough chuckle. Her mind buzzed for several minutes before the sound faded. Feeling gradually returned to her legs, she wobbled upright. All thoughts of soaps, splinters, and linens were gone. She needed to escape, to be as far as possible from the sour, cold form in the other room. She was hurrying toward the servants' stairs when the door opened. A messenger boy emerged. "Letters!" She stared at him. He smiled and displayed a handful of parchment notes. "For the Baron. I'd read them, of course, but I can't." He chuckled. She blinked. "Not because I couldn't, you see, but because I can't." He frowned, then tried again. "I still wouldn't if I could, but because I can't, I won't. So it all washes out, really." He noticed the wetness in her eyes and hurried to add, "I only meant I can't read. Not really, at least. I've got most of the names, you see, but strings of words melt together. Soup, I call it. It's not the worst of things, not in this place." He made as if to pat her arm, but paused awkwardly. He set the notes down on a table and patted them as though to relieve himself of the impulse. "Dally-ho!" he called, and left the room. His strangeness had been a welcome distraction. That sour knot of fear and horror was still high in her throat, but there was now a little room to breathe. She stared at the door through which he'd left. She should tell a guard. The thought was torn out and replaced with their gleeful reception of the news. Clara's mother had been her age when the last Baron died. Clara knew the stories. The transition to Baron Randers had been bloody and brutal. Someone else could light the fire. Clara left through the servant's door and hurried to her other duties. She mindlessly scrubbed the halls that day, and her worry seemed to fade with the labor. That night, the sword ring was in full swing as she passed the castle courtyard. 2 guards stood at the center, clenching wooden swords. The other guards circled around them. A steward wove through the crowd with a parchment, noting down bets and wagers. The captain barked something. The swords flashed to life, cracking and whistling through the air. They met with a thunderclap, and the match blazed to life. Clara had no stomach for the jeers and sickening grins of the onlookers. When she reached the hutch, it was buzzing like a beehive. While the maids fiddled with the last of the day's work, a multitude of conversation danced overhead. "Lady Kenton bought a brick of rosewater soap from that merchant at Oaken's. Big as my head it was. New messenger today. Talked my ear off. Rab, the miller? Who said? The Lansons made it into town today. Kiss me thrice if they'll make the tax." The comment caught Molly's attention, and she let her needlework fall to her lap. "Jake did look wrung out today. His fields can't be good, weather as it's been." The counterpart in her conversation turned out to be Jenna, a large woman with a hand for gossip and news. Had she been born higher, she might well be running a castle by now. Jenna bobbed enthusiastically. "That's it, exactly. Wrung out as an old dress he was. Of course, you heard what happened to the Benters." "Same as you," Molly said. "Baron took their crop, and their honey too," Jenna said eagerly. "Baron always gets his fill. That's what I always say." On a better day, Claire might smile at that. Jenna spoke often and rarely had much to say, save for whatever dust was stirred up by the day's events. Once her store of eavesdropping and rumors had dried, she trended to the same handful of conversations, like a wagon too deep in the ruts. "The Lansons don't have much besides the crop," Molly said. "Lou was sick all spring with that whistle cough that went through. Her ma..." "Who's her ma again?" "Chelsea," a half-dozen voices echoed. "Chelsea," Molly agreed. She was too busy with Lou to set up hives or make those embroideries she likes. No jellies or rugs either to trade. Once Jake's fields are cleared, they won't have 2 pennies to rub together. Baron eats first, I've always said. Odd, he's so short. There was no way around it, and Molly knew it. Her face soured, and she turned to Clara. How about a song? A dozen conversations dribbled into silence. The gentle click clack of hooks and needlework paused as faces turned toward Clara. She always looked forward to this moment, when she could sing and lift the day's burdens from the others, even for just a few minutes. Watching their eyes brighten was worth more than the praise of any lady or baron. She wanted to help them. But not tonight. At the thought of the baron, her throat seemed to close. Tears filled her eyes, though she could not say if they were relief or fear. Easy there, Molly said gently, her hand warm against Clara's back. Is it your basket? I saw Yenner's boy steal it this morning. Foul family, that is. What? Clara wiped her face. Had her basket only been stolen this morning? Sound returned to the hutch around them, and Clara tried to steady herself. No, it's the Baron. He's... The image of him sprawled on the floor was like falling into a winter lake. Her breathing sharpened and shortened. Molly embraced her, and though the woman didn't know the truth, it made little difference to Clara. Chapter 2. The following morning was brighter. Not bright, exactly, but better than the sooty gray of the previous day. The night had treated Clara well, and she could breathe without any tightness in her throat. No guards had pulled her from the hutch last night to question her about the Baron. A rooster crowed outside, just like any other day. Life had gone on. The morning had brought fresh worries for the maids. They stirred around Clara, dressing, brushing, fidgeting, knocking mud from shoes. She dressed and brushed her hair, but she no longer had a basket to fidget with. She helped Molly squeeze into her shoes. Eventually, the last of the rustling and fidgeting stopped, and the group knew they were delaying the day. Molly sighed and opened the door. A hesitant hopefulness was building in Clara with each step. The guards must have realized Baron Randers was dead by now, but there had been no riot. Yenner was slumped in his chair, his grin as awful as ever. The castle stood as it always had, indifferent to the occupant of its highest room. She fancied she could see the spear hole from here, though she was much too far. She wondered who the new Baron was. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine that things might change, for the better, that the new Baron would be different, but it was a fool's hope, and she knew it. Breakfast was leftover leek soup, and baked apples that were many hours beyond the warm, syrupy flavor they were intended to have. Claire found she had an appetite, and she enjoyed her bowl while the others shared the morning news. It seemed all but certain the Lansons would be taxed today, what with the Baron's warning last week. Nam wondered if the Barons would take the Lansons today and make their daughter Lou work the kitchens for a few years to pay off the balance of the missing tax. Clara waited for someone to contradict her, to say Baron Randers would not be doing much of anything. She was confused. Had the new Baron not announced himself? What was he waiting for? I happened to hear a very curious story from a stable boy while I was shaking out rugs yesterday, Celia said. She was an older maid and well known for her ear. As it happened, the stable hand heard it from his master, who had been drinking at Oaken's when a traveler stopped by. Small man, as I understand it. The traveler had been on his way to Turntill or Nayborn, someplace at least, when he came across the wreckage of a caravan. Bandits, he thought, and turned his horse right toward Hannagrill. Rather be robbed here than there, I expect. Nayborn must have been, Molly announced. Sides were taken, and court was held to determine whether Turntill or Nayborn was more likely to have bandits. There was also the distance to consider, as everyone knew Nayborn was a full day's ride farther from Hannagrill than Turntill. A chorus of dissenting voices claimed Turntill was in fact the farther of the two. They were selecting a smaller sub-council to decide the matter when the morning bell clanged. Clara, you'll check that map in the Baron's room, Molly asked. Yes, Clara said instinctively. Molly might assign a new maid to the Baron's room in the future, but it would still need to be cleaned in the meantime. Clara had a feeling that whoever the new Baron was had made a mess moving into his new quarters. The maids left the warmth of the kitchens and scaled the stairs, trickling into corridors as their duties demanded. Clara took a breakfast tray and ascended the stairs higher and higher until she made the final turn to the Baron's room. The scar was a pale arc of broken stone beside her, a memory rather than a warning of Baron Randers' anger. Maybe this Baron would be different. She let the hope hold for a second before sighing and entering the Baron's quarters. The room was still. Watery light poured in from the spear hole, bathing the fur-lined floors in grays and golds. Yesterday's breakfast tray sat on the couch. Something about the room was very strange. Clara set down the new tray and eased her way to a dead torch. A few sparks from the flint and steel and the torch blazed to life. She lit the other 3 torches and all the shadows melted away. She suddenly realized what was wrong. The room was already clean. No wine stains, broken spearheads, ink spills. She checked the desk to make sure. Letters were piled high, unread. The inkwell and quill lay beside them. Voices ground their way under the nearby door, leading toward the dining hall. They were almost too loud to ignore, and Clara eased closer. "Today'll be the day them Lansons get a fleecing, eh?" a guard was graveling. "If Randers gets around to the bloody writ," another said. "Never knew him to wait on a taxing." The first voice fell. "Could be he's letting interest build up." "What do you know about interest? Been guarding the steward's room again?" There was a hard thump and the clash of metal on metal. The door buckled as something crashed against it. "Enough," another voice called, clear and sharp. The scuffle stopped. If our beloved Baron wanted more taxes, he'd simply take them. Such is his seat. Seat? The third voice was a whip. "You royal idiot, it's..." But Clara was not listening. The full weight of the conversation fell upon her. They were waiting for orders from Baron Randers. Her stomach turned, and it was all she could do not to flee to the kitchens. Somehow, she forced herself across the sitting room and eased the bedroom door ajar. If she'd had a better breakfast, she would have lost it. She jerked the door shut and began pacing the room. Had nobody noticed? A full day without seeing or hearing him should have struck someone as strange. She thought about it more. Strange, maybe, but not worrisome. Everyone knew Baron Randers was an odd, paranoid man. He was just as likely to disappear for a week's hunting trip as he was to hole himself in his quarters for fear of assassination. He preferred to eat his potatoes field style, and he never bathed while the moon was waxing. He was cruel to outsiders, except a rare handful he treated extravagantly. Her stomach was settling, and she found herself staring at the desk. No, it really was not so strange for the Baron to vanish for a few days, or even a week. But even so, he still commanded the castle through orders and writs, through the letters that lay unopened at the desk. She found herself sliding into the chair. The letters were lovely, inviting. The first letter was crisp and cool beneath her fingers. She unfolded the parchment. Hard, dark letters greeted her. "Lord Randers. Merchant stopped by, said he saw the remains of a caravan on his way to Turntill. Looked to be the work of bandits, he thought. Thought you might like to know. Warren." The next letter had an antler sigil stamped in gold wax. A gentle pressure and the seal broke. "Dear Randers, you'll be most pleased to know I've arranged for that troop to visit in a fortnight. I am pleased to cover the expenses myself again, of course. Your favor is worth much more to me than mere gold. I pray the troop's music may ease the weight of your office. I wondered if you might permit me to visit my little Dan again. I would very much like to see him. I imagine he's ready to come home. Do you know when that might be? Loyally, Rose Highhorn." An anonymous plain parchment. "The wolves ate well today." Clara could not stop, and soon she had a dozen letters opened around her. Pleas, gossip, records from the steward, requests for orders. She tapped the quill nervously. It was not too late. She could open the guard's door and tell them she'd just found him like this. Things would be as they'd been, except someone else would be sitting where she was right now. Someone that would ransom a kidnapped son to a noble family for a bit more gold. She could prevent that, correct it. She skimmed the remainder of the letters, discarding the rumor mongers and any non essential communications. She was left with a tidy stack. In them, she could decide the fate of the tanner's apprentice who'd been swiping and selling the finer skins. A sign off to dispossess the Lansons. Rose Highhorn's letter. She found crumpled parchments crammed into the desk as well, old notes and letters the Baron had drafted but never sent. She read them, gaining a feel for the way he wrote, the shape of his letters. She knew there was no going back, and she drew a fresh sheet from the desk. The stopper popped from the inkwell. She drafted a letter to Garin in the dungeon, folded the parchment, and sealed it with the Baron's stamp. Little Dan would be going home. She didn't want to replace Dan with the tanner's apprentice in the dungeon, so she advised the tanner to let the boy off with a warning. She was considering the Lansons when she heard a familiar, cheery voice outside the guard's door. Beard is coming along nicely, Davin. Any advice for a spring chicken like me? Huh? The deep voice said. I've already tried fish oil and swimming in that pond past the Benters. Thought it worked for a minute, but it was just some scum stuck to my cheek. The boy's voice dropped conspiratorially. Time to try sleeping in the stables, you think? Claire could hear the confusion dawning on Davin's face. The second guard broke the silence. He's sporting you, idiot. Another pause. Claire scribbled her response to the Lanson's letter. He thinks you're stupid. This seemed to register, and Claire heard 3 heavy steps away from the door. Think I'm thick? The boy's voice was firm, though a touch higher than normal. More muscular than thick. But what did Poot here just say to you? You think I'm stupid. Yes, and just before that. Another long span. The boy hurried to keep his momentum. He's sporting you, idiot. 3 hard steps back toward the door, and the silence was now murderous. Let the boy pass and resolve your idiocies later, the hard voice cracked down the hallway. The Baron needs his letters. Clara strained to catch the last phrase. Hardly need his orders. Much appreciated, Gannon, the boy called. She hurried to fold and stamp the Lanson's dispossession order, waving it to dry the wax. She organized the stack of sealed letters and sprang from the chair just as the door swung open. The messenger boy entered, grinning like a thief. Close shave. Is Baron Randers out again? He must be, Clara said. Do you have any messages for him? What gave it away? He produced a stack of letters bound with twine and traded them for the 3 sealed parchments on the desk. He frowned, and his voice dropped into a fair impersonation of the Baron's. Read the bloody names. He held the letters up for Clara to see. These aren't addressed. A chill raced down Clara's spine. She had forgotten. How do we tell where they go? I'm not supposed to open them, he grumbled before looking up brightly. We could just ask the Baron when he gets back. Did he say where he was going? Oh, he's not out, Clara said quickly. He's just out with a cold. I'll bring those letters in so he can sign them. The boy paled. He's in there? You think he heard me? I don't think so, Clara said, reaching for the letters. He looked relieved and waved her off. Don't trouble yourself. I'll drop them off. He doesn't want too many visitors. She blocked off the bedroom door. Not with being so sick. Here, I'll just... Nothing to... She yanked the letters away. He held up his hands in mock defense. May the poets know I was disarmed by a maid. Her laugh sounded high. The door was behind her, and she cracked it open enough to slip into the dark room. She made a show of walking over to the table beside the bed and murmuring in a low voice. She broke the seals, scanned the letters, addressed them, resealed them. The messenger was inspecting the spear hole when she eased out of the bedroom. He turned and his eyes flickered past her to the darkened slice of room before the door closed. His voice was quiet. That didn't sound too bad. Clara handed him the envelopes. Her throat was dry as straw. Her plan suddenly seemed very foolish. Dangerous. He shuffled through the letters, muttering to himself. Garin in dungeons, Gannon at the garrison, and Sal Skinter? His eyes lit up, and he savored his next breath. The Sal Skinter. Do you know him? Clara had not known him an hour ago, but things were changing. He's the tanner. His voice was low but thrilled, like a child not wanting to wake his parents. Yes, that's him, the tanner out by the smithy. By my boots, what a treat this'll be, sunny as it is. Clara couldn't help smiling. Am I missing something? The boy was practically dancing as he led them away from the door. Sal has a particular way of tanning, you see. He'll string them up and just watch them dry out, like he's watching a fishing line. With the sun so strong, he could be out all day. And this interests you because his face reddened and he glanced toward the Baron's door before whispering. Jeremy and I have a game, you understand. We try to break Sal's focus on the hides. Noises, distractions. One time, he broke off, patting his pockets and not meeting her eyes. Not that I would do anything of the sort today, or ever for that matter. I was only joking. Jeremy the tanner's apprentice. Of course, Clara said lightly, though it wouldn't hurt to walk lightly around Sal. He might be sharper than you think. I may be sharper than he thinks, the boy said. The sharpest knives are off to break, Clara countered, pulling a line from the weaponry. The boy bowed. In a fool's hand. Clara blinked. You know the play? But he was already leaving the room, his cloak slipping into the corridor. Clara left soon after. The rest of her day passed in slow, monotonous work. Her stomach soured with each hour, and she expected guards to be waiting for her in every new room she entered. She curtsied to the nobles, and they ignored her. She kept her head down whenever she passed a guard. The hours ticked by until the sun was melting into the horizon. She ate a plain, cold dinner in the kitchens and hurried to the safety of the hutch. The high-horn boy was released today, Jenna was announcing as she entered. The woman's eyes fixed on Clara, her newest audience, and she hurried to add, Dan's out of the dungeons. Pale as a fish, but okay elsewise. The Baron must have had his fill, Clara said, and for the first time that day, in many days, she smiled. Chapter 3. She was still waiting for the bucket to spill, but she couldn't stop a feeling of warm satisfaction as she sorted through the morning's letters. There was a grateful letter from the Highhorns, an acknowledgement from Sal in childish, wandering letters, gossips and empty grovels. A crumpled letter contained several anonymous, biting complaints of the Baron. She was smiling as she opened the final note, sealed with a crossed sword and dagger. The garrison in the North Wing. She broke the seal. B.R. Why are we waiting to raid the Lansons? You nearly let us get them last week, and now you say to hold. The lads are restless down here. Find us something to break or take. There'll be trouble within the week if you don't. Gannon. In her rush to seal the letters yesterday, there hadn't been time to decide why the Baron would ever release the Lansons from their tax. To order it so bluntly would arouse too much suspicion. She'd merely told Gannon to wait. There must be some way to protect the Lansons from what amounted to robbery without revealing herself. The desk was old and scarred by the rough use of many barons. As she thought, her thoughts handled the riddle while she traced the grains. She wondered what it would be like to live in the castle every day. Not in a room so nice as this, perhaps, but somewhere you could wake up warm and dry no matter the weather, where you didn't share a room with a dozen others. She answered the letters as best she could, though she hid Gannon's letter in the drawer for later. When the boy came today, he lacked his usual bounce. After a quick scan of the room, he confessed, You were right about Sal. He knew Jeremy was managing some of the finer pelts, but his voice fell to a whisper. The Baron didn't even throw him in the dungeon. Sal said Jeremy was lucky. Still, he has to watch the hides dry for a week, poor guy. She was scrubbing a hallway in the north wing later that day. The Lanson's riddle seemed tangled as a fishnet. She took some small comfort from the long stretch of muddy stones paving the corridor before her. She would ordinarily loathe the task, Today, she needed time to think. Guards patrolled the hall every few minutes, beginning at the nearby garrison and snaking through the castle. She shuffled aside and inspected the floor as two sour-smelling guards strode down the hall. The first had the satisfied air of one spoiling a secret. No action on the Lansons today. Gannon say? Didn't need to. Read it on. You can't read, the other guard snapped. On his face. Read it on his face, the first growled. They turned the corridor. The exchange seemed almost funny to Clara, but there was raw anger when the two reappeared on their next loop. Humor soured to fear as Clara realized the truth in Gannon's letter. The captain knew his guards. They were like dogs in need of a hunt, and she had made herself the hunter. As she scrubbed, she considered her options once more. She could send a company of guards to investigate the banditry up by Turntill. The travel would take their edge off, and they'd jump at the chance to fight bandits. Clara had a strong suspicion, though, that the bandits were an outpost of the Baron himself, judging by the series of unsigned, cryptic notes about hunting and the trail to Turntill. Stationing bandits on the road to Turntill was devilishly clever. Travelers had already heard rumors of attacks on the path. Any sane party would take the longer route and pass through Hannagrell before heading east. Hannagrell would make a fortune, cripple the nearest town, and collect spoils from the raids. It was the balance of cruelty and greed only Baron Randers could have seen. But would he have shared the scheme with anyone? Clara felt the flicker of excitement die. She couldn't order Gannon to send the guards after the bandits. If he knew the truth, she was sure to reveal herself. She scrubbed at a clod of dirt, stamped into the cracks between stones. The danger of her situation rose in her throat, and soon hot tears were melting the dirt to mud. The whole situation seemed hopeless. How could she convince 30 trained guards to leave the Lansons alone? These men were already chafing, hungry for action. It was only a matter of time before they suspected the Baron openly and stormed into his room. Then they would know. She thought of fleeing the castle. Only the maids would notice she was gone. With a water skin and some bread, she could probably make it to Turntill or Naborn. The farmhouses around the castle might even take her. They had no love for the Baron, and she would work hard to earn a place. She could hide when the guards came for the harvest. It would be so easy. And she thought of that warm, safe life for a moment. But she knew she couldn't give the castle back to the guards and to some new, heartless Baron. The same instinct that had made her begin this game would chain her here until the end. The tears had stopped. Clara resumed scrubbing, and the mud came away easier. The guards did not yet know her secret. They were restless but not bloodthirsty. There was still time. She was walking to the hutch when she heard a squeal from a side alley, almost swallowed by the wind. She strained to hear, and there it was again, the high, delighted cackle of a child. The weight of the Lanson's riddle lifted, and she enjoyed the wonderful noise. Then she heard another, and another. 3 children, all laughing. She hadn't heard children laugh like that since a troop passed through years ago. She eased into the alley and peered around the corner. The 3 kids sat against the wall, watching a young man kneeling before them. She couldn't see his face, but she didn't need to. It was the messenger boy, and he seemed to be telling a story. His words were lost to the wind, but she watched as he threw a proud hand this way, then slouched and pretended to waddle his way there. He mimed drawing a great sword before slumping under its weight. The children clapped and pointed and roared. The story went on, and it seemed the boy was a king, a miller, a knight, a cook. He was breathing harder now as he threw an arm to his head, the dramatic flair of a prince. Then he changed. He sagged. His head fell into an unassuming bow. His elbows and knees popped outward as though his body had grown to twice its size. The cook. He fumbled in the grass, trying to mop up the imaginary soup he had just spilled. The kids howled. The boy straightened and was himself once more. The 7th bell rang from the castle, and the kids raced into the tangle of homes and side streets. Once they were gone, the messenger sighed and sunk against the wall. He looked very small and tired, a shadow of the animated performer. His head rested against the wall, eyes closed for a span. Claire wanted to say something. She should tell him how good a thing he had done. But the boy was already groaning to his feet, and he turned down the alley. Chapter 4. Hard to call this flour, Nan was saying the next morning. She pushed back the flap of a burlap sack. Even from the fireplace, Clara could see the flour was poorly ground and lumpy. As Nan poured some into a mixing bowl, several sticky clumps tumbled from the sack. Coarse and wet, Molly said disapprovingly. There were similar noises from the other maids, though they had the air of one observing the sun had risen again. Mold will set before long. Must be a benter's bag, Nam said. The miller was an unloved man, and it was well understood he spared no love for the farmers. If the grain was wet, delivered late, or of poor quality, he blamed the farmer. It mattered little if the baron's tax was the day after a heavy storm. Somehow Rab still expected the farmers to deliver dry, perfect grain. He couldn't be bothered to store the grain until it was properly dried, and so he ran wet grain through the mill, grumbling all the while, and sold sacks of sticky clay. This ordinarily filled Claire with a grim satisfaction. There was little difference between old bread made from good flour and bad flour. The maids would be unaffected. The guards, on the other hand, would complain for days while the cooks worked through the sack. Their warm, airy bread would instead be hard with an odd flavor. This situation held no humor for her today, though. The guards needed no more inciting. She was working through the letters in the Baron's room when her luck broke. Think Randers is still in there? Poot's voice slithered under the door, quiet as a snake. Where would he go? David grumbled. You could check, Poot said slyly. Just take a look, why don't you? Say hello. Clara looked around the room wildly. 3 gold says he's not even in there. We could take the day off. That would be good, David said uncertainly. There was a groan as the large man shifted on the other side of the door. Clara's mind raced. She couldn't mimic the Baron's voice. Should she knock something over, slam a door, laugh as though she'd heard a joke? The door creaked open and a surprised, terrified scream tore from her. Stop, you fool! Gannon's voice cracked down the hall hard and fast as an arrow. The door paused, one large hand gripping the frame. Gannon's boots slapped the hallway. Close the bloody door, Dave, and even you must. The door jerked shut, and Claire let out a shaky breath. The sounds faded in the hallway. She blazed through the remaining letters, keeping an eye and an ear toward the door. She felt as though the door would bang open at any moment. She pardoned, lended, or approved according to each request in the letters. Anything to escape this room for another day. She finished quickly and decided not to wait for the messenger. As she was leaving, Poot's final words crawled under the door. I'm going in tomorrow. This whole week feels fishy. The walls were closing in. She felt it. The temptation to disentangle herself from this nightmare had never been so alluring. Tomorrow she could act as though he'd just died and alert the guards herself. They would never know she had been pulling the strings for the last 3 days. How could she, if she was the one to reveal his death? In one move, she would remove herself from this terrible weight and ally herself with the guards. She would be safe. The day passed slowly. As she scrubbed and hung wash, she no longer worried about the guards and the Lansons. The opportunity to unburden herself and fade into anonymity was inviting. She considered it over and over, amazed at the neat solution. Yet there was a problem, buzzing like a gnat against a window. She tried to ignore it, but the ringing only loudened with each hour. The walk to the hutch was cool, yet nowhere near cold enough to stop the sword ring, of course. Guards clustered around the fight, watching the fighters dart and feint. The wooden swords cracked together furiously, a manic drumbeat. There was a meaty smack, a yelp. The guards broke into cheers and curses. She passed a wagon of bruised fruit. 2 guards stood in the back of the wagon, passing out the produce to townsfolk. Their eyes were toward the match, and they hardly seemed to notice the people they were handing fruit to. The fruit had been destined for castle wine before she'd repurposed it in one of yesterday's letters. Frank the cobbler accepted an apple gratefully. He whistled as he left, and the tune warmed her heart. She had done that for him. Her feet angled her across the road, and before she knew it, she had turned down an alley. She was not surprised to hear a giggle. It bubbled into a laugh, then a squeal. For the first time in hours, her thoughts lifted from the decision. She blinked awake. The wall beside her was rough, splintered wood. The original stain still showed in places, holding distorted reflections of the alley. She looked different in the dark, glossy mirror. Was that really her? A gleeful chortle pulled her from the thought, and she peeked around the corner. The boy was kneeling again, acting out some dramatic scene for the three children. They laughed through the show. When the seventh bell tolled, they hurried deeper into Hannah. The boy took his seat against the wall. Clara made her decision. That was quite the performance, she called, walking toward him. He grinned, all signs of fatigue evaporating. I'd say my audience seems to be growing. Your newest member is Clara. He nodded to her. Your newest entertainer is Mason, like the Masons. Her smile was strained, nervous. You're not like the guards, are you? He began counting fingers. Smarter, smaller, nicer, and better looking, the women tell me. Clara cleared her throat. Do you like the guards, I mean? That's an odd question. Yes, Clara said. She studied his face. What if things could change? What if Hannah was different? Is the king coming to save us from Randers? Mason teased. Clara shook her head. The alley was empty around them. Her voice was less than a whisper. Baron Randers is dead. No, Mason hissed, eyes wide. Did Gannon take the castle yet? Gods, he could be worse than Randers. She clamped a hand over his mouth. He's been dead for 3 days. Nobody knows except us. I've been running Hannah through the letters. He looked as though she'd struck him with an oar. She gave him a few seconds and removed her hand. You're serious? She nodded. 3 days? But the guards suspect something, Clara said. That's why I need your help. You care about the people here. The guards will find out, he said. There's no way you can hide this. Not alone, she conceded. He ran a finger along the wall. His expression cleared, and he looked up. The fruit, the high-horn boy, Jeremy, that was you? Clara smiled. With your help. Chapter 5. The hutch creaked and groaned as the maids stirred. Clara dressed and helped Molly squeeze into her boots. Celia and Jenny looked older in the gray light. There were sighs and coughs. Socks were stretched, dresses smoothed. The morning was like any Claire could remember, except the baskets were no longer empty. An apple or a bruised pear sat in the wicker. Some held a handful of bright red cherries. Summer plums rested in others. Women started as they saw the fruit, like they suddenly saw a new figure in a familiar painting. After a breath, each seemed to remember yesterday's fruit wagon. Something like a smile touched them. Breakfast was lovely in the kitchens. It seemed the Baron had realized it made little difference whether they ate day-old bread or fresh, as there was always a surplus. They were not to indulge themselves, the letter emphasized, but they could each have a fresh buttered roll at breakfast. Clara doubted the guards would notice a few less amidst the bowls of pudding, fruits, and smoked meat. Nam pulled the tray of golden rolls from the oven. Steam curled from the surface for all of a minute before the maids and cooks claimed their piece. It was hot, and Clara passed it between her hands until it cooled, unwilling to put it back. The roll was flaky and delicious. She'd forgotten what good food could do for you. She felt 2 feet taller with that warmth in her, and the others did too. She took the stairs quickly after the bell rang. Around and around, up and up. She passed the scar with hardly a glance. She grabbed the broom and bucket before entering the room. She would need them today, though the room was already spotless. She lit the torch beside the corridor door and propped her broom beside the desk. A stack of letters awaited her, and she set to work. Dawn had broken and was spilling through the spear hole by the time Mason entered through the servant's door. Clara was leafing through old letters in one of the chests, which was full of what could only be considered blackmail. She found misdeeds for half the garrison, evidence of bribery, dungeon sentences from other towns, histories of banditry. In short, the chest was lined with insurance to keep the Baron's guards securely in his command. One step out of line and their rotten history could be hung overhead for all to see. Clara put down a stack of notes regarding Gannon's bloody history. He killed 5 guards to become captain of the garrison, the best of the guards, men that were respected and loved, and he'd done it to prove himself to Baron Randers. It was terrible, horrific. It was also her greatest leverage against Gannon, her single arrow to save for the perfect shot. She met Mason at the far end of the room. He nodded to the chest. "What's that?" "Our backup plan," Clara said. "It's proof most guards are dirty, and Gannon is the worst of them. If something happens to us, we need to tell people." There was a distant sigh on the other side of the door. "Anything from Poot yet?" She shook her head, voice low. "He's just been complaining about his bedding in the sword ring. Still, he could barge in at any time." "I best get ready then," Mason said. "Could you help me? I don't want to go in there alone." Neither did Clara, but she nodded. Together they opened the door to the Baron's room. The sight was unpleasant, and a foul smell was growing. The Baron lay across the balcony stones, half in light and half in the room's shadows. A gust of wind reached into the room, and the reek vanished. Clara realized it was only the wind that was sweeping the stench away. Otherwise, it would have reached the guards. Otherwise, it would already have reached the guards. Mason carefully avoided looking toward the balcony and busied himself with the wardrobes on the other side. She left him to it and completed the last of the morning's letters. It was difficult, as the only light in the room came from the torch in the far spear hole. Once finished, Clara drew a fresh sheet. "Gannon, the time has come to tax the Lansons. The milling records say the Lansons are 300 sacks under quota. Send 5 guards and a wagon to the Lansons' farm." Ink beaded on the quill as she recalled the phrasing she and Mason had determined last night. "A long winter is approaching, and I will eat bread through it all. The guards will too, but only with enough grain. The guards are to bring in the rest of the Lansons' grain and transport it to the mill. There is enough grain in the Lansons' field to make quota without taking anything else of theirs. If these orders are not followed, I'll see the 5 fools are strapped to the water wheel at the mill until they are washed clean of disobedience. Baron Randers." Clara knew she had too much heart to enforce the punishment if it became necessary, but it was the best insurance they'd thought of. She sealed the letters and began sweeping the floor aimlessly. It was the better piece of an hour before the corridor door burst open. Poot stood there, grinning wickedly. "Lord Randers, we wanted to see you." Davis stood behind him, a mountain of muscle and boiled leathers. Poot tried squinting past the glare of the torch Clara had lit. "You in there, Lord Randers?" There was a breath of silence before the bedroom door banged open. "Poot!" roared a gravelly, drunken voice. A figure emerged from the darkened room, silhouetted between the spear hole and the torch's blaze. The figure was wrapped in thick furs as it brandished a wineskin at the now terrified Poot. "I'll tan your hide and pickle it. Your grandson will have bruises by the time I'm through with you. You won't be fit for stew. Fish bait might even be a—" "Apologies." Poot's face was ashen. He tried to slam the door and bow, succeeding in ramming his head into the door. He cursed and managed to shut the door. "Apologies, my lord, we just—" He trailed off hopelessly. "Have a good day." "Idiot," Davin grumbled on the other side of the door. The worry and the constant fear lifted from Clara in an instant. She could have laughed or cried if the guards weren't on the other side of the door. Instead, she crossed the room to Mason. The fearsome figure grew more boyish with each step. Up close, the furs hung more loosely on him than the Baron. What had seemed to be a beard was actually just fireplace soot smeared across his chin and cheeks. They were grinning, eyes alight. "It worked," Mason said. "The wineskin was a great touch." Mason sniffed and recoiled. That isn't wine, but it was a great distraction. I could hardly see you. Poot had no chance beside that torch." Mason sighed. "That ought to keep them out of here for a few days. Time for the letters." Clara wanted this moment to last, but there was more work to be done. Mason returned the furs to the Baron's room and exited through the servant's door. Before long, Clara heard his cheerful voice echoing down the hallway. "Brighten up, Poot. Handsome guy like you shouldn't be so down." Poot wasn't up for his usual sparring today, and Mason slipped back into the room without issue. Clara handed him the letters, and the morning's work was done. The sword ring was especially brutal that night. It seemed each match now had 4 fighters rather than 2. The whole courtyard stunk of wine as the guards roared and cheered. It was hard to tell, but it seemed there were several missing from the standard crowd. Her band of 5 must still be at the Lansons, for better or worse. The fruit wagon sat outside the courtyard, and a guard handed Clara an apple, not turning from the melee. The maids were downcast when Clara entered the hutch. Only Molly would meet her eyes. They went out to the Lansons today. It'll be bad. You can be sure of that. I hope not, Clara said, and it was the truth. She received an indifferent letter the following day from Gannon, saying that 300 sacks had been harvested from the Lansons. It was the news she had hoped for, but she needed to know more. Had the guards taken anything else? Had they worked with Jake to collect the rest of the wheat, or had they ordered him to stay in the house? Jake was a good man, and Clara hoped a few hours working alongside him would give the guards a new appreciation for the common folk. Mason joined her for a few minutes as they exchanged and discussed the day's letters, but the castle had too many questions, demands, and struggles for their quick meeting. They met behind Oaken's Inn once again, after Mason's nightly performance. A girl with a nest of brown hair had joined the audience. She was solemn as the show began, but soon she was giggling and laughing with the others. When the 4 kids had left, Clara and Mason took seats against the inn's wall. Mason had made a point of hanging around the garrison that afternoon, and he'd overheard several conversations. Jake had been in the fields when the guards arrived, and he was more than happy for the help. With the extra hands, the work had been done by early afternoon. The rumor ran that Chelsea was so grateful she made a pie for each of the guards. Clara smiled. Chelsea was well known for her pies, plum especially. While the guards ate, Jake saw to the creak in the wagon the guards had been complaining about all morning. They had left with full stomachs, a smooth ride in the sun against their back. It was better than Clara could have dreamed. Did you hear which guards were chosen? Clara asked. I'll investigate, Mason said. Good. The other guards will start refusing orders at some point. We need to win over as many as possible before then, starting with these 5. It's the only way things can change once we're caught. As they returned to the main street, shouting sprang from the sword ring in the courtyard. It seemed some rule had been broken, and the winning team was now being disputed. Someone seized the steward with the coin pouch, shaking him angrily. We'd better do something about that, Clara said. The Kitchens were jubilant the following morning. Word traveled fast, and it seemed the Lansons had paid a visit to the miller, who was in a swell mood after one of Chelsea's plum pies and some kind words. The flour he'd sent to the castle the next day was fine, pure, and dry. The morning rolls were exceptional. In a letter to the castle staff, Clara informed them the new flour would be called Lanson flour for inventory purposes. Curiosities around the castle were piqued. Before long, the story of the Lansons' harvest and kindness to the miller passed through the castle and garrison. Mason reported to Clara that the guards were pleased with the day's bread, and they requested more Lanson bread. Despite Clara's win, the sword ring remained a brutal, bloody reminder of the castle's savagery. The pot boiled when Gannon broke Yenner's hand. It seemed like a lifetime ago when Yenner's son had taken her basket, and Clara felt no satisfaction as the man cradled his twisted hand. He was quickly discarded as arguments broke out regarding the match's payouts. The next day brought Clara's boldest change to Hannagrill. Gannon, I am displeased with your actions at the sword ring. I cannot lose able men through sport. I disband the sword ring. No guard is to participate in or gamble on duels within the grounds of Hannagrill from this day forth. Instead, the hour after the day shift will be devoted to a public training. You and 10 other guards will lead a sword play training for the townsfolk. This is a chance for you and the guards to demonstrate your skill at arms, to impress upon the people your ability and technique. Teach them basic techniques in footwork. At the end of each week, the townsfolk will be tested. Whichever guard improves their group the most will be rewarded with gold and food, as will the subjects. Each training will increase the respect for the garrison. Respect and order are limbs of the same tree. Within the month, the garrison's reputation will be heightened, and trouble will lessen. Do not fail me. Baron Randers. It was a striking move, her bravest yet, but the sword ring was the worst of the guards. It was a daily manifestation of their power and cruelty, a profitable embodiment. To imagine Hannah improving while the sword ring survived was like hoping wheat could grow while the scythe was swinging. In the sword ring's place, Clara and Mason hoped the public training could bring the guards and common folk together. Clara wrote to the stewards, and word quickly spread through Hannah of the training in the courtyard that night. It was a scrubbing day, and she made her way to the north wing. She sensed the anger of the patrolling guards as soon as she entered the corridor. As she worked grime and dirt from the floor, she overheard several passing conversations. The guards were furious that the sword ring was removed. Gannon stressed very clearly that this order came from the Baron, who hadn't explained the decision. Also, the guards now had to train the subjects in basic combat for an hour every night. This was oil to the fire, and almost every guard Clara saw that day was like a snake, ready to strike. Clara's face was growing hot as well, and she threw her weight into scrubbing. She couldn't believe Gannon had neglected to explain why the sword ring was gone or why the training had replaced it. Listening to him, they seemed entirely unrelated, meaningless edicts from Baron Randers to make a guard's life worse. He hadn't even mentioned the prize. She couldn't rely on him to communicate the orders anymore. But he didn't know that. She would use that to her advantage. A band of hopeful, cautious men arrived at the courtyard that night. There was the cobbler, Frank Mancher, several woodsmen who hunted the surrounding forests for game, 2 of the Benter boys, and a scattering of older men. It was a small group, but it was a start nonetheless. Clara was relieved to hear Gannon pair up the guards and townsfolk before explaining the night's objective, stances. He finally mentioned that gold and food would be awarded to the guard and subject who showed the most improvement. Interest stirred the guards, and a few of them eyed their student hopefully. Apparently, Gannon was not willing to explicitly contradict orders. The lesson began. Most townsfolk had never held a sword before, and they clutched the heavy wooden swords clumsily. Several gripped the short stick with both hands to keep it from teetering over. Shouts erupted from guards as they ordered the men to hold the sword with one hand. One of the Benter boys dropped his sword in alarm. Angry, gruff orders continued through the lesson. The townsfolk slouched into stances with varying degrees of success. The woodsmen moved with the slow caution of a hunter. The Benters darted like fish. But as the lesson neared its end, Claire noticed one group pulling ahead. Judging by the mix of surprise and anger growing on Gannon's face, he was seeing the same. Frank Mancher, the graying, plump cobbler, was crouched in a fine stance. He was well balanced, and his sword arm was not rigid or floppy as the others were. A young guard walked around him, inspecting his stance. He pushed Frank lightly, in the cobbler's stance absorbed the weight. He held his ground. The guard nodded approvingly and continued circling. You're still too tense. Relax your shoulders. Mason nodded beside her. That's Pig, or that's what they call him at least. He was at the Lansons. It didn't surprise Clara. His dad was quite the boar hunter, apparently, until he wasn't. What happened? Clara asked. It's one of the garrison's favorite stories. Do you remember the last scene in Bonehead Huntsman? Clara grimaced. You know your plays. The next few days settled into something like a rhythm. Clara's fear of discovery had temporarily lifted, as the story of Poot's embarrassment at the Baron's hand spread through the castle and town. If anyone had begun to question the Baron's absence for the past week, Poot's story was all the proof they needed that the Baron was alive and well. It was also a fine reminder to leave him well alone. It came as no surprise that week when Pig and Frank won the training contest. The surprise came when Pig received 2 months' pay, and Frank brought home venison steak, potatoes, onions, honey, and ale, not to mention a few coins. The next week's training saw 30 men from the town and nearly all the guards. Gold and food spoke, it seemed. Wives, sons, daughters, shopkeepers, and castle staff had arrived to watch the training. There was still caution, even fear. But Clara saw hope shining in many faces. The focus that week was on parrying. The new guards watched surreptitiously as Pig guided Frank through the technique, speaking when the cobbler needed to adjust his weight or grip. He motioned for Frank to swing at him, and Pig easily parried the blow. A few words, and they repeated the attack, but slower. Frank nodded eagerly, and they switched roles. Most guards still shouted, scolded, or belittled their trainee, but the Lanson guards were trying to follow Pig's approach. They were hard, gruff men, and they struggled to control their anger at the students' sloppy stances and techniques, but they tried. Chapter 6. As the sessions passed, more and more guards shifted their style. By the week's end, the balance was split. With the surge in attendance, Clara widened the rewards to the top 5 teams that showed the most improvement. 4 of the 5 teams were teaching Pig style, as Clara and Mason deemed it, with Pig and Frank winning once more. Gannon was changing as well, and not for the better. It became obvious at the start of the 3rd week's training. The tall captain was weaving through the training duos, silent as the grave. "Watch his face," Mason said quietly. They stood with the other castle staff around the courtyard. The night was sweet with apple rolls from Oaken's. Claire had written a letter to Oaken promising to pay for any rolls he distributed that week. Business was good. Claire focused on Gannon's face. His lip twitched into a snarl before settling into hard, solemn lines. 3 more paces, and the sneer flashed and vanished like lightning. "It's whenever he sees Pig style," Clara said. Gannon finished his circuit, and circled back to the front, passing by the crowd as he did so. His eyes flicked through the chatting townsfolk, landing on the rolls. Or those, Mason added. After the training concluded, many of the townsfolk hung around for a few minutes to finish the last of the rolls. A warmth was building in Clara, unaffected by the autumn chill. Life was improving for everyone. The trick was to keep it this way when she was inevitably discovered. On the way to the hutch, she couldn't help but notice Gannon speaking fervently with Oaken. The joy inside her flickered. Claire was pleased with how well the trainings were bringing the town together. It had the added benefit of distracting the guards from some of the other changes, of easing them into a new way, but she knew the illusion could shatter if Gannon or another guard started poking around the Baron's room. She and Mason decided the town needed to see the Baron again. At least they needed to believe they saw the Baron. The Baron had often snuck down the servants' stairs to cause trouble around the town, especially at night. It was hardly a stretch for them to begin spreading rumors of a sighting, to leave one of his wineskins conspicuously in the street, for Mason to shout a few curses down the street in the Baron's raspy voice. A few brave people peered out of their window in time to see the furred, shadowed figure striding back to the servants' door. It was bold, but by the following morning all of Hannagrill swore the Baron had been out. Even if they hadn't seen him themselves, they knew someone who had. The sightings did not calm Gannon. His anger was as poorly concealed as ever at the trainings. He even began glancing toward the castle, as though wondering if the Baron were watching, wondering what he was thinking. The sight worried Clara. She and Mason stayed in the Baron's room for most of the next day. It was evening when someone knocked on the corridor door and Gannon's smooth voice slipped through. "Lord Randers, do you have a few moments? I have important news." Clara and Mason tensed, but this is what they had prepared for. "Out with it," Mason croaked. "Certainly," Gannon said, and Clara could hear the pleasure in his voice. The door rattled. There was a pause. "The door is locked, my lord." It was the best precaution they had. They'd locked the servants' door as well, and they had the key. Still, Mason wore the Baron's furs, and the torch beside the corridor door was lit. Caution paid twice, after all. "Obviously," Mason replied in the gruff voice. "What is your news?" "I'm afraid you'll have to see it. It's an urgent letter from Turntill." Mason seemed to lose his thread, and he gripped the couch nervously. "Bluster," Clara hissed. Mason nodded and collected himself. I'll see to it in the morning. Slide it inside. It's too large, Gannon insisted. You need to see it now. I don't need to do anything, Mason roared, but his voice broke, and for a moment it soared out of the Baron's gravelly tones. He coughed to cover the slip, but the silence on the other side of the door was deafening. Of course, Gannon finally said, such is your seat. His footsteps faded down the hall, but his words hung over Claire and Mason. He had offered no letter. Lady Highhorn's troop arrived that night, and Clara immediately directed them to perform beside the nightly training. Although the townsfolk and majority of the garrison were in high spirits and unconcerned with the Baron's infrequent appearances, Gannon worried her ceaselessly. She felt as though the bucket could spill any time. She needed to make each day count. Chapter 7. It was 3 days before he snapped. Clara stood beside Mason in the courtyard, chewing an apple roll and listening to the troupe play through Eve's Bottom Ellie. People laughed and danced around her. Troops had visited Hannagrill on rare occasion, and they were always cloistered in the castle. This was the first outside performance in years. The song was unfamiliar, but people hung on every word. Clara was sure it would be sung, drummed, and hummed for months. The session was also progressing well. Practice strokes thudded against wooden posts with a steady rhythm. The occasional laugh went up from a guard or trainee as a stroke went wide. Instructions were firm but measured. A handful of guards watched sourly from the outside. They had persisted in shouting and scolding their student through the earlier weeks, finally driving them to quit. They were out of the running for the week's rewards, and they were not pleased. Today was the last session of the week, and Clara tried to join the crowd's excitement at the approaching prizes. It was hard, though, as Gannon paced through the courtyard. His mouth curled into a snarl more often than not. He tapped his sword hilt restlessly. His eyes roved the crowd, the guards, the castle. He was a caged wolf. Eve's Bottom Ellie ended to ringing applause, and his eyes narrowed. Then he was sprinting, flashing across the courtyard, ramming through the castle door. Murmurs ruffled the crowd. He's going to the Baron, Mason whispered frantically. Clara knew it was true, just as she knew they could do nothing to stop him. For a moment she wished she had chosen differently 3 weeks ago, that she could sink into anonymity and let someone else finish this. But she had to do this. She had to try for everyone. Clara left the crowd and entered the courtyard. The troop eyed her as she walked. Guards and trainees paused their sequences as she planted herself in their center near Pig and Frank Mancher. She wanted to run from the weight of Hannagrill's eyes, but she forced herself to stand tall. Gannon would not be long. She looked from guards to troop to the people. She saw Molly, Sal Skinter, Old Nam. Jake and Chelsea Lansing watched her curiously, their boys beside them. Oaken wove through the crowd, a flag of steam rising from his platter of apple rolls. Rab the Miller was nodding eagerly to a nearby fisherman's story. A dusting of flour rained from his hair. Children laughed. In a start, Clara realized she had already succeeded. No matter what happened when Gannon returned, Hannagrill had bloomed these last weeks. It was time for everyone to know why. We've all noticed a difference, Clara began. All eyes were on her. Something changed in Hannagrill. Old wrongs have been righted. Children are not held in the dungeon as ransom. Apprentices are instructed rather than punished when they disobey their master. Food is shared among us rather than bloating the castle's wine barrels. The crowd was nodding hesitantly. Far overhead in the highest room of the castle, Clara heard a shout. Gannon has just seen the source of all this change, Clara continued. The kindness, the food, the music, everything. It's not from Baron Randers. None of this is. It's all from us. Life can stay this good. Better if we stick together. Confusion stirred the people. Frank Mancher moved first. What about the Baron? Gannon is bringing the answer. As she spoke, Gannon burst through the door, panting and grinning wickedly. Randers is dead, he roared over the courtyard. I claim his title and castle. Guards to me. The Baron died 3 weeks ago, Clara said into the shocked silence. I've been sending letters in his name since. A maid? Running the castle? Gannon scolded. Guards, to me! To the Baron! A few guards stepped toward his iron voice, but Clara was not done. You killed 5 guards to become captain. You should be in the dungeon, not commanding it. Gannon's gaze was murderous. Tell me about it, he snarled and shoved Yenner forward. Throw her in. Yenner's hand was still twisted from Gannon's blow in the sword ring. His jaw worked as the command struck him. He looked scared, so unlike the man from a rainy morning 3 weeks ago. Grab her, Gannon bellowed. Yenner looked uncertainly between the maid and the captain. Gannon's sword hissed from the scabbard. The blade eased toward the guard. Yenner grew pale. The sword drifted closer. His eyes roved. The sword, Gannon, Clara. The blade settled along his shoulder, the point at his neck. He slumped and nodded once. Mason cried out as Yenner stepped toward Clara. Her mouth was dust. Joel Durner, Harris Lartson, Will Keating. Yenner's eyes flashed with each name, with memories of old friends. He struggled forward. Ralph Pilters. Yenner dropped his head as though against a fierce wind. He squinted. He was reaching toward her. Thomas Tentham. Yenner's good hand froze above Clara's wrist. His voice was hollow. Not Tommy. Gannon said Tommy had to leave. Gannon lied, Clara said gently. Tommy was too well liked. He was an obstacle, and Gannon killed him. The breath left Yenner. He turned to Gannon. Eyes fell on Gannon. Eyes of astonishment, realization, fury. Don't believe the girl, Gannon hissed. Lock her up now. But Yenner stepped away from Clara, watching Gannon. He fumbled at his scabbard and jerked the sword free. He held it awkwardly in his left hand, but his voice was strong. Where's Tommy? Not here, Gannon snapped, but I am. Put your sword away. You killed him. It was not quite a question. Gannon laughed. You think he suddenly decided to chase his dream of painting? Give the garrison to me? There's one way to take what you want, and I'm taking this castle, starting with the girl. Gannon strode toward Clara, sword a devilish blur of silver. Clara closed her eyes and savored a cold breath. She hoped she had brightened Hannagrill, hoped some of that brightness could survive a new Baron, that someday someone could finish what she started. The air was sweet with apple and cinnamon. The now roaring crowd was like a murmur of a stream. Gannon's boots clapped against the cobblestones, and she waited for the whistling stroke. But instead there was a meaty smack. Clara opened her eyes to see Gannon tumbling to the stones like a discarded doll. A wooden practice sword hung in the air where his head had been moments before. Frank the cobbler held it. He seemed surprised to have actually struck Gannon, and doubly so that the blow was effective. All of Hannagrill was shocked, Clara included. She began to laugh. Well done, Frank! Pig clapped him on the back, and soon Frank was being congratulated by Yenner, Oaken the innkeeper, Molly, Old Nam, Sal Skinter, a dozen guards. Gannon lay forgotten beside the throng. Nobody raced to his defense. No conquering roar spoiled the gleeful shouts. As people laughed, cheered, cried, Clara waited for the illusion to break, for someone to steal this happiness, claim this castle. She was broken from her watch by a grinning pig. Think there's room in the dungeons for Gannon? His words sunk in slowly. He was speaking to her, asking her. She smiled. We can make room. I was thinking the same, he said, and she heard the sincerity in his voice. He and Yenner carried Gannon into the castle. Several other guards helped shoulder the weight. Others opened the doors. Clara smiled, and it was all she could do not to sing. Well done, Mason said warmly. Together they watched the crowd cheer and ramble around Frank Mancher. Hannagrill would never be the same, and that was worth celebrating. Clara nodded to the troop, and they coaxed their way into something warm and sweet as a honeyed roll. The song was new. The song was lovely. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. In the next episode, I'll be describing how the writing process went, some questions I had, and some things I learned along the way. Thank you so much.